Hi, everyone. We're here at the Metals Investor Forum doing backstage interviews. And today I have Mike Pettingell, who is the CEO of Vizsla Royalties. Mike, thanks very much for being with us. You've certainly got an interesting and exciting story behind Vizsla Royalties. And so we can perhaps dig in now and get into some of the weeds, and you can tell us about it and what catalysts and drivers there are to look forward to.
Absolutely. You know, we do have something special at Vizsla Royalties. We have a NSR portfolio that covers Vizsla Silver's flagship Panuco project. And of course, that's a very large, high-grade, undeveloped silver primary resource in Mexico. And that's very rapidly advancing towards feasibility and then ultimately production in 2027.
Excellent. So if we can go to sort of the history a little bit, the background on how Vizsla Royalties came to be. Maybe you can tell us a little about how Vizsla Royalties was spun out of Vizsla Silver, the value that's created, and maybe provide a little color to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the impetus was really to provide shareholders with long-term exposure to the asset. You know, we feel that this type of asset only comes along once in a generation, and we want to maximize value for shareholders, which of course we are. Right?
Exactly.
And so we took the Great Bear model that they spun out, a 2% NSR on the Dixie project prior to Great Bear's acquisition by Kinross. And essentially the same model. So if you held shares in Vizsla Silver, you would have received shares in Vizsla Royalties. So in a sense, we have the same shareholder base.
Excellent. And in terms of value that's created since that spin out, this is going back about a couple of years or so.
We spun it out in 2024.
Okay.
It was right. Well, we spun it out privately in the early 2024, prior to the announcement of the preliminary economic assessment at Panuco. You know, we actually listed in would have been August of last year with about a $10 million valuation. So very low. In fact, lower than what was realized in that PEA.
No doubt.
And of course, we've now done dramatically well, not only against this backdrop of rising commodity prices, but we've actually raised capital in June of this year to go out and purchase an additional 3% NSR covering that Panuco district. In fact, that additional NSR covers the actual mine plan. This completely transformed the net asset value of the company. In fact, it more than doubled it. So incredibly accretive acquisition, and we're now trading at a close to a $250 million market cap.
That's a long way from 10 million.
Yeah.
In such a short time.
That's right.
So Mike, tell us why are royalty companies attractive? You know, some of the viewers may not quite understand the differences, the advantages, etc. Why are they attractive versus explorers/miners?
Yeah, and that's a great question. You know, in the precious metal space, you know, it's very capital intensive. Explorer developer goes, they need a lot of money. And royalty companies have that ability almost as a financing tool for exposure to the asset in terms of that production profile in the future. You know, Vizsla Royalties didn't actually have to lend out that capital, of course, as it was a spin out, but we don't have to lend out capital in the future. And I think that's the really important point for shareholders. There's no dilution associated with a royalty company. As the underlying operator continues to de-risk the asset, of course, you should realize a natural re-rate into that royalty company, a lot closer to that full value of the asset itself. And so in our case here, as Vizsla Silver publishes its feasibility study, as it gets its permits, and then of course gets into production in 2027, we should realize a handsome re-rate without actually having to raise or spend any money. Not only is that on the operation and production side, but when it comes to exploration, we don't have to raise money to do any drilling. That's all on Vizsla Silver, although we get to benefit as shareholders of royalties on those intercepts.
Royalty companies have been called probably the most capital efficient businesses out there.
And that's why they trade at a significant premium.
Absolutely. It's a great way to have exposure to tremendous upside from production, from ongoing potential discovery, and without the risks that come along with permitting, building, operating mines. And so it's a beautiful blend of the
far less risky way to play
Exactly.
both the asset and the commodity.
Exactly. So tell us a little bit about Panuco. That's obviously your flagship in terms of the royalty that you have, the project size, its stage, target start date, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's a historic mining district located in Mexico. The discoveries date back all the way to the conquistadors, but there's been no modern exploration on a consolidated basis until Vizsla Silver got in there. They made a novel discovery back in 2020 and have rapidly grown this resource base up to 365 million ounces, grading almost over 500 grams per ton across that resource base. The PEA that they published back in 2024 highlighted economics, NPV5 of $1.1 billion US after tax, with an after-tax IRR of 86%. The payback period on the project is, less than 9 months. So this is truly world-class. Where they are now is marching towards a feasibility study that should come out here probably next month. We've been saying publicly by year end.
Okay.
But stay tuned, I will say. And of course, with project financing, the mandate recently being announced, Vizsla Silver has 2x their initial capital outlay. That really de-risks more of the project and can provide investors with confidence that this will go into production. The outstanding catalysts that remain, or milestones, I should say, not besides that feasibility that's pending, is of course the permits, and then of course making that construction decision by Vizsla Silver's board, ultimately to have first silver in the back end of 2027.
Excellent. Tell us, how can Vizsla Royalties continue to grow? What options are out there? Obviously, there could be different avenues, but perhaps you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and we get asked this question quite often. I would say that we're not a traditional royalty company. It's a saturated space. And again, this harkens back to the financier element of being a royalty company. And it's very competitive as such. We're not going out looking for copper royalties in Africa. We're not going out and looking for gold royalties in Canada. We're sticking to our knitting and using the competitive advantage that we've acquired throughout our years in Mexico. We get to follow Vizsla Silver as being, call it, the mother. We have a right of first refusal with Vizsla Silver on any new royalties that it might create on its new property acquisitions. Now, Vizsla Silver has a property holding of almost 40,000 hectares, where Vizsla Royalties only has ownership or royalty coverage on 5,000.
Wow.
So there's tremendous room to incrementally grow. But where we sit right now, we've made a large acquisition, and we get to realize that re-rate and be very choosy with how we want to grow corporately.
Wonderful. So it sounds like over the next, say, 6, 12, 24 months, there could be quite a few catalysts that will help create considerable more value for Vizsla Royalties. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think it's really just the natural de-risking of the Panuco project. I think it's the rising commodity environment that we're in. But then there's 1/3, and we haven't touched on it, and that is the acquisition multiple. When we spun out Vizsla Royalties to shareholders, Vizsla Silver retained a 40% ownership in Vizsla Royalties. It was always designed as an optionality tool for Vizsla Silver to also be non-dilutive in its exploration and development, right? There's very much alignment between the two companies. But where Vizsla Royalties sits now, with so few and far between quality royalty players and precedent transactions that have existed in the space, namely Triple Flag acquiring Origen and of course Royal Gold acquiring Great Bear Royalties, that stands to benefit a significant premium in terms of an acquisition multiple beyond the re-rate potential from operational success and of course exploration success at Panuco.
So, Mike, lots of big drivers that could, along with a very supportive silver price and commodities market in general, push things a lot higher, and a lot of exciting things to look forward to at Vizsla Royalties.
We think so. We think so.
Thanks very much for this. I think our viewers are going to be pretty excited to follow you.
Excellent. Thank you.